Abigail, and I don't know if you recall, but over the weekend was the 50th anniversary for the Bloody Sunday, which was from the walk of Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, which happened 50 years ago. Today I'm going to talk to you about why you should all watch the 2015 Oscar-nominated film Selma. I think as college students we should be more aware of the civil rights because it's not only part of our history, but it affects us to this day. Now, in order for me to talk to you about why you should watch Selma, I'm going to give you a little history on the Selma March in the civil rights, and I'm going to talk to you about where it happened, why it happened, who were involved, the consequences at that time, and the consequences to this day. Now, as we can all recall, in middle school or maybe in high school, we learned that slavery was abolished after the Civil War, and from a period of 1880 to 1890, this decade was like a free pass for all free black slaves to go and register to vote. And I say this was a period of a decade because after 1890, whites start intimidating blacks at the poll booths, and they start adding taxes and vouchers and literacy tests, which are all unconstitutional now, but at that time, with the Jim Crow laws in the Black South, it was okay for them to do. Now, going into where the Selma March happened, it happened in Selma, Alabama, and a little background history to why it happened was on September 15, 1963, 26 young kids are getting ready to change into their choir robes for the sermon. Around 10:22 a.m., 15 sticks of explosives are thrown at 16th Street Baptist Church in Selma, Alabama, and the result is the death of 4 young girls ranging from ages 14 and 11. Now, their only crime for these young girls was that they were black. And as you can imagine, the people were outraged and sought justice that these young girls did not receive. And as a result, people started to protest peacefully and have church sit-ins. But as you can imagine, in a small town like Selma, with the small population of blacks, nothing really happened. It wasn't until the Nonviolent Student Coordinating Committee got involved, which at the time was Chairman John Lewis, who today is one of our congressmen of Georgia. And they kind of set the setting for the Selma March to happen because although they tried to recruit people for marches, it didn't really happen for them. There wasn't any change that was being made. It wasn't until Martin Luther King and his group got attention into Selma that marches really started to happen and people started to coordinate more and more. And we go into this because now I've told you about who was involved and where it happened, but the Selma March didn't really happen and it wasn't like a big idea until the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Now after Martin Luther King had talked into Selma, people started feeling a little bit more uprooted onto why they should march and remember the 1963 murder of these 4 young girls. And to add to this, there was a march in Marion, and there was only one flaw to this march, was that it was done really kind of late, and at the time it was getting darker sooner. So the sheriff, Jim Clark, took advantage of this, and he sent state troopers to beat on the protesters. And with that being said, Jimmy Lee Jackson was his family. He was with his mother and 82-year-old grandfather. And as he saw his neighbors and friends being beaten by the state troopers, he thought of how to get his family out of there quick. And he remembered that down an alley was Mac's Cafe. And he thought, well, maybe if I take my family and set them around the table and give them menus, we can all pretend like we're just there and we're not part of the protest. Well, there's one flaw. The state trooper, James Fowler, follows them into Mac's Cafe, and he immediately, once inside the cafe, starts beating on the 82-year-old grandfather. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody's beating my 82-year-old grandfather, I'm going to try to defend him. And that's exactly what Jimmy Lee Jackson did. He started to defend his grandfather, but what James Fowler did, the state trooper, he took out his gun and he shot him 3 times. In an interview, 45 years after the incident, he recalls that he did shoot him. He thought he shot him once, but could have been 3 times. And he says that to this day he lives a guilt-free life because he thinks that if he hadn't shot Jimmy Lee Jackson would have reached for his gun and killed him. Now, this sounds a little familiar for a person in authority to shoot an unarmed black man, doesn't it?
Yes.
But at that time, obviously no justice was served for Jimmy Lee Jackson, being that he was black and Jim Crow laws were still being followed in the South. And his death was not in vain, because this really woke up the people in Selma once again, and it felt, the 1963 murder felt kind of real again, because somebody else had died for the same reason. Well, the march for Selma was not supposed to happen until March 25th, but a rehearsal was made on March 7th, which just happened over the weekend. It was known as Bloody Sunday, and the importance of this march was that it was televised. Now, people were going to walk from Selma to Alabama, and they were going to cross the Edmonds-Pettus Bridge, and they knew that at the end of the bridge would be Jim Clark and the state troopers. Jim Clark said, "You have to count to 3 to disperse and go back to your church." And he only counted to 1, and the state troopers attacked the people. Now, the importance was that journalists and other people around the nation were there to witness this rehearsal, and people nationwide watched as blacks were being beaten by men. And in a 2010 interview by Alex Sands for the Alabama Annual State Report, he interviews John Lewis, who was there at that time, and he says that he remembers being tear gassed and beaten by men on horseback. Now, the consequence to that day was obviously brutality, but Martin Luther King also called for clergymen of all kinds who stood in the name of God and justice to come to Selma and march with them. And on March 25th, 1964, Selma March from Selma to Montgomery happens, and this was a nationwide movement that even got the attention of celebrities at that time, which were Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, who were protest songwriters and singers. Now, I talked to you today about the Selma March and where it happened, why it happened, who were involved, and the consequences at that time and the consequences to this day. Now, I think that with this small amount of knowledge that I have given you, I think you should be a little more motivated to be interested in the civil rights, because it affects us to this day right now. And I feel that it's a little motivation for you guys to all watch the Selma movie. So, thank you.